Now, a charity is warning that some bereaved families could be forced to sell their possessions to pay for funerals. While costs have fallen slightly recently, a basic send-off in Scotland will still set you back just under £4,000. Let's talk to John Halliday, who's co-founder and chair of the charity Caledonia Funeral Aid. Good morning to you, John. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Laura.
£4,000 sounds like a lot of money. What do you get for that?
Well, the £4,000 figure, it's just under that, is only for a basic funeral. It doesn't include costs for a wake, food. It doesn't include flowers, anything that you would consider extra. It's just looking at the most basic part of that.
Like what?
Good news. So it would be the cremation or burial costs itself, the funeral director's cost, the bare minimum that's needed to make sure the funeral can take place. So seeing that figure stabilise, it's just come down by less than 1% this year. It's actually a glimmer of hope. If you look at 10 years ago, the prices have doubled since then. You know, this is the best news we've had in a long time in terms of these funeral costs rising. But it still puts us in a position where we live in a society where the basic cost of a very basic funeral is around £4,000. And in fact, today's news is that the total cost of dying, when you include professional fees and those extra send-off costs like flowers, it's actually more like £9,200 for families.
Why are the costs so high?
They've just gone up and up for the last decade. There's been an element where there's been just increases in the basic charges for things. We're actually surprised to see so little inflation around cremation prices, for instance, this year, which is why we're considering this to be good news. But every aspect of this has seen much higher than normal inflation every single year, much higher than anyone's earnings have increased every single year. The professional fees are the part that's really jumped up this year a little bit, alongside those costs like trying to host and organise a wake have increased. But over the past decade, it's that major increase has been in the basic costs of a funeral. That's now been offset a little bit. My own analysis of this today is that actually there's something about changing attitudes. So as these prices have gone up, and maybe because the way COVID changed how funerals had to be delivered, more people are aware of ways to save a bit of money, perhaps having a direct cremation or a direct funeral, which is where you separate out the celebration of life into a separate ceremony. You can often save yourself a lot of money by doing that.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. What sort of things are you hearing from people who are contacting you for help with their funeral costs?
Well, we offer free support for people around funeral costs while they're arranging a funeral, and sadly we actually often hear from people after they've already spent £7,000-8,000 on a funeral, and they say, look, I'm in huge debt here, how on earth am I going to pay this off? I've got a bank loan, they might have sold their possessions, TVs, everything they've got to just try to pay this off. What we're then unfortunately in a position to say is, well, it's too late now. The funeral's already taken place. If you something that debt, you're saddled with that. Where there could be real support is where people who are in the process of arranging a funeral can be supported. For instance, just the advice to shop around. Less than 1 in 5 families even get a second quote from any other funeral director, and sometimes you could save yourself thousands and thousands of pounds in that space.
And just to be really clear, just to be really clear, this is not funeral directors upselling or charging extra more than they need to. These are just the basic costs.
Yeah, look, some funeral directors are extremely reliable and will always give you an excellent price. Others, of course, there's people who maybe have higher prices or potentially upsell things like coffins. Do you really need an oak coffin and things like that? There might be some pressure on people in that space. But I don't want to label all funeral directors as the same. There's some really earnest people out there. But the idea that people don't shop around means that people will never notice those opportunities, if you so mean. They won't know whether they're getting a good price. Everyone should be at least getting a second quote from someone.
I suppose, though, when your nearest and dearest die, shopping around is the last thing on your mind, and maybe do people just need to sort of readjust what they think that they want to do to send off a loved one?
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, we speak to people all the time. My heart goes out to people. This is the hardest time. There's no two ways about it. This is the hardest time in someone's life during a bereavement. Absolutely. Of course, there's that pressure to get things done. You just want to put your head in the sand. That's fair enough. People around you can try to help out as well. But one of the problems we really see is the only thing worse than bereavement is bereavement followed by poverty and debt. And those people who are saying, I've got £7,000 worth of debt, that's more than my income next year. How on earth am I going to pay this off? They're ending up in a really difficult space. That's why we're really aiming to try and end this funeral debt, funeral poverty cycle as best we can, and provide as much advice as we can. The biggest issue we face actually is deposits. One aspect of the report that's come out today that isn't there, although it's a very valuable report, is around deposits. Normally people have to pay 50% of the price of the funeral in advance in cash. I mean, or you can pay on a credit card, of course. But you have to have that money available. So we might be talking £1,000 if you're lucky. We could be talking about well over £2,000 that you need to have on the day that you get to the funeral directors. People just don't have that. That's the point at which we need to intervene. And actually, one of the other glimmers of hope is that we're seeking to recruit volunteers from across Scotland to create a volunteer bank that can help people while they're arranging the process, funeral and bereavement guides, and we're just starting that now.
John, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. John Halliday there, who's co-founder and chair of the charity Caledonia Funeral Aid. And if you're interested in that, you can look them up and contact them.